The gatekeeping theory is one of the earliest media and communication theories, and we'll see it's relevant even for the digital media. The gatekeeping theory is the nexus between two facts. Firstly, events keep happening everywhere all the time. Secondly, it's virtually impossible for the news media to consider all these events as newsworthy and cover them as news. Many decisions are taken between the point when an event occurs and it becomes a news. The decision points are known as gates, and the decision makers are known as gatekeepers. Journalists have the power to influence media content just by deciding which of these information to select as news and which of these information or events to avoid. The first article on the gatekeeping theory in the field of media and communication studies was published by David Manning White in Journalism Quarterly in the year 1950. The article was called "The Gatekeeper, a Case Study in the Selection of News." Professor Pamela Shoemaker and Tim Voss published their book Gatekeeping Theory in 2009. This book discusses a number of sophisticated models in addition to the initial linear gatekeeping model. Gatekeepers can be people or decision makers who allow or prevent information from becoming news. And these days, they could also be algorithms that allow certain information to become news and other information to be ignored. We'll now discuss the simple gatekeeping model. The cell phone here is a representation of the news source N. It has a number of news items N1, N2, N3, N4, N5, etc. The news source wants these news items to pass through the gates of the media organization so that it can become news. However, for a number of reasons, the media gatekeepers can allow only some of these informations to reach the news consumer. The others are not allowed through the gates. The news consumers don't get to know of events which are not allowed through the media gate. The gatekeeping process hence begins at the information gathering phase itself. The journalist selects which information will become news and which information will be ignored. The next stage in the gatekeeping process takes place at the media outlet. Journalists might decide to edit out certain portions or to even provide a certain angle or a frame to the story, or for the digital outlets they could be adding images and hyperlinks. Apart from the concepts of gatekeepers and gates, the gatekeeping theory also talks of the forces around the gates itself and around the channels through which information passes. The force is defined as a characteristic of the event that influences how it will move through the channel. For example, if it is related to an event which is already in news, it is most likely to be covered as news itself. These metaphorical gates occur at various locations in a news organization. If there is a positive force in an event, for example, an election-related news during election season, then there is more likelihood of it passing very quickly through the gates. In 1991, Professor Shoemaker adapted the original gatekeeping model to consider the influence of societal, institutional, organizational, routine, and individual practices in the gatekeeping model. At the individual level of gatekeeping, the selection decisions are very personal. So what does that journalist like or does not like? It could also be driven by factors of gender, education, class, or religion. At the level of everyday routine practices, the gatekeeping decisions are influenced by established practices. For example, in the newsroom, there is a shared understanding of newsworthiness. News values define whether an information is newsworthy or not. The organizational policy of media organizations also constrains the gatekeeping influence of individual journalists. For example, if the organization has profit maximizing goals, the journalists will not be allowed to cover news which does not lead to profit maximization. Organizations outside the news organization also influence which information will become news. For example, news sources, audiences, advertisers, markets and economic forces, government agencies, public relations agencies, and other media influence the gatekeeping process of a news organization. The gatekeeping process is impacted at the social level as well. On the social level, certain information are culturally more acceptable and available as a news item. So they are more likely to become news. In the new media ecosystem, gatekeeping is no longer limited to individual media organizations. It is a much more complex interplay among individuals. The gatekeeping channels now cross and reach around the world in a web-like structure. This complex web of information includes communicators of all types. Gatekeeping involves group decision making, with multiple editors deciding which stories will receive prominent coverage. Audience expectations and production costs also influence the process.